November 15, 1942. 0100 hours. 8,400 yards south of Savo Island. The Imperial Japanese Navy battleship Kirishima steamed through darkness, her crew confident in their superior night optics and years of intensive training. On her bridge, Captain Sanji Iwabuchi peered through the finest optical rangefinders money could buy, equipment that had given Japanese gunners a decisive edge in previous engagements. What Captain Iwabuchi did not know was that 8,400 yards away, an American battleship had been tracking his every move for the past 7 minutes, not through binoculars, not through searchlights. Not through the superior Japanese optical systems his navy had spent a decade perfecting, through invisible electronic eyes that could see through darkness, smoke, and rain. Eyes that were feeding precise range, bearing, and speed data directly into mechanical computers that automatically adjusted gun barrels with an accuracy no human hand could match. The USS Washington opened fire at 0100 hours. 9 16-inch shells screamed across the darkness. At least 9 hit. Some accounts based on Japanese damage control sketches and wreck examination suggest 20. Within 7 minutes, Kirishima's steering jammed, her main battery fell silent, massive flooding threatened to capsize her, and flames consumed her superstructure. By 0325 hours, she rolled over and sank, taking 212 men with her. 1,098 survivors were rescued. Captain Iwabuchi survived the sinking. His final report to Admiral Nobutake Kondo claimed his guns had scored hits on the American battleship. He genuinely believed this. In the chaos of night battle, with shells passing overhead and his ship disintegrating around him, he had no way of knowing that every one of his salvos had missed. The American ship had never entered visual range. She had simply appeared out of nowhere, fired with devastating accuracy, and vanished back into darkness. The USS Washington, under command of Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Lee Jr., had not been touched. Not a single Japanese shell had found its mark. This was not luck. This was the result of radar-directed fire control operating against an enemy who could not see the ship firing at them. Washington's Mark 8 radar had tracked Kirishima continuously throughout the entire engagement, feeding data to Mark 1A, computers that automatically calculated firing solutions faster and more accurately than any human crew could achieve. This was not supposed to be possible. Japanese naval doctrine, built on decades of experience and training, held that night battle belonged to the side with superior optics and better-trained lookouts. By every measure that mattered in 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy possessed both. Yet here, in the waters off Guadalcanal, something fundamental had shifted. The Americans had changed the rules of naval warfare, and the Japanese were only beginning to realize the game had transformed. The revelation would take months to fully comprehend. The magnitude of American technological superiority was so vast, so incomprehensible to minds shaped by decades of Japanese advancement, that even when Japanese officers held the evidence in their hands, they struggled to believe it. The story of how the American Navy leaped 2 years ahead of its Japanese counterpart is not simply a tale of one invention or one breakthrough. It is the story of 2 industrial philosophies colliding, 2 approaches to warfare meeting, and one nation's systematic underestimation of an enemy they had dismissed as soft and unprepared. Japanese confidence in their naval superiority had deep roots. Since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, the Imperial Japanese Navy had cultivated a culture of excellence built on rigorous training, tactical innovation, and technological advancement. Their officers spent years mastering the complexities of night combat, visual gunnery, and torpedo tactics. Their enlisted men trained relentlessly in optical recognition, range estimation, and rapid gun laying. This training produced real results. Japanese lookouts could identify ship silhouettes at greater distances than their American counterparts. Japanese gun crews could achieve accurate fire faster after target acquisition. Japanese torpedo crews had developed the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo, a weapon that could strike targets at 44,000 yards while traveling at 38 knots, powered by oxygen rather than compressed air, leaving no telltale wake. It carried a 490-kilogram warhead, more than double the punch of American torpedoes. The long lance represented Japanese naval philosophy. Take an existing technology, perfect it through meticulous engineering, deploy it with crews trained to exploit every advantage. In engagement after engagement during the first year of war, this philosophy produced victory. At Savo Island in August 1942, Japanese cruisers had devastated an Allied force, sinking 4 heavy cruisers in less than an hour of night combat. The victory came through superior training and tactics. But the Americans were fighting a different kind of war. Where Japanese naval development focused on perfecting existing capabilities, American development focused on changing the fundamental nature of naval combat itself. The difference was invisible to Japanese observers until it was too late. The development of American naval radar began not with military requirements but with scientific curiosity. In the 1930s, physicists at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington studied radio wave propagation. They discovered that ships reflected radio waves in detectable patterns. This was interesting. What made it revolutionary was the systematic American approach to translating laboratory curiosity into deployable military capability. By 1940, the USS New York had conducted the first successful test of radar-directed gunfire. The system was crude, requiring multiple operators and extensive manual calculation, but it worked. Guns could be aimed at targets beyond visual range. This caught the attention of Admiral Ernest King, who would become Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. fleet. He recognized that radar represented not just an incremental improvement, but a complete transformation of naval warfare. King pushed for rapid development and deployment. His vision was not simply to add radar to existing ships, but to integrate radar into every aspect of naval operations. Detection, tracking, fire control, navigation, aircraft direction, every function that relied on human vision could be enhanced or replaced by electronic systems. The challenge was staggering. Radar technology in 1940 was experimental. Making it reliable enough for combat deployment required solving thousands of engineering problems. Making it compact enough for shipboard installation required miniaturization that pushed the limits of existing manufacturing. Making it accurate enough for fire control required precision that exceeded most pre-war industrial standards. The Americans solved these problems not through individual genius, but through systematic industrial organization. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology Radiation Laboratory was established in October 1940. Within a year, it employed over 4,000 scientists and engineers. Over the course of the war, this single laboratory would develop more than 100 different radar systems, each optimized for specific tactical applications. The Radiation Laboratory represented American organizational genius applied to technological warfare. Scientists from universities across America converged on campus laboratories in Cambridge. Physicists who had spent careers studying theoretical problems now focused on practical applications. The laboratory operated on principles that seemed chaotic to traditional military research, but produced results with remarkable speed. Research teams worked in parallel on overlapping problems. Competition between groups was encouraged. Successful solutions were immediately shared across all teams. Failures were analyzed and lessons distributed within days. This created an innovation ecosystem where breakthrough in one area accelerated progress in adjacent fields. The laboratory's output was staggering. Mark IV radar for aircraft tracking, Mark VIII for surface fire control, Mark XII for improved surface tracking, Mark 22 for close-range anti-aircraft work. Each system addressed specific tactical needs identified through fleet feedback. When combat reports revealed limitations in existing systems, engineering teams modified designs and tested improvements within weeks. Manufacturing integration was built into the research process from the start. Laboratory engineers worked directly with industrial partners to ensure designs could be mass-produced. Prototypes were tested not just for performance but for manufacturability. Components were standardized across multiple systems to simplify production and maintenance. This approach meant laboratory developments reached fleet deployment faster than Japanese systems moved from prototype to initial production. Japanese radar research remained primarily academic through 1943. Brilliant scientists at university laboratories made genuine advances in component technology, but the organizational structure that could translate these advances into deployed fleet systems did not exist. Research remained compartmentalized. Different laboratories competed for limited resources rather than collaborating. The bridge from laboratory to factory to fleet was never built with the systematic thoroughness Americans achieved. This was American. Industrial strength in concentrated form. Japan had brilliant scientists. What Japan lacked was the industrial depth to take brilliant ideas and transform them into thousands of identical units deployed across an entire fleet. The difference was not in scientific capability, but in systematic application at scale. The Mark 8 fire control radar entered service in mid-1942. It could track surface targets at 25,000 yards in complete darkness, providing range, bearing, and rate of change with sufficient accuracy to direct main battery guns. The system was not perfect. Early versions suffered from interference and false returns. But American doctrine accepted imperfection if the system worked well enough to provide tactical advantage. Japanese approach to technology demanded perfection before deployment. This meant Japanese radar development, though scientifically advanced in some areas, lagged in practical application. Japan had developed a 10-centimeter cavity magnetron by 1939, a significant achievement. But perfectionist engineering culture delayed deployment until systems met impossibly high reliability standards. By the time Japanese radar reached fleet deployment in meaningful numbers, American systems had advanced through multiple generations. The gap was widening. American radar development was not a single program, but dozens of parallel efforts, each feeding improvements back into the industrial base. When Mark 8 radar showed limitations, engineers developed Mark 12 with improved discrimination. When Mark 12 proved insufficient for anti-aircraft work, they developed Mark 22 specifically optimized for tracking aircraft. Each iteration took months, not years. Each improvement was deployed across the fleet as quickly as ships could be retrofitted. Japanese naval technology development could not match this pace. Resources were limited. Industrial capacity was stretched thin building ships, aircraft, and weapons. Radar development was assigned to multiple competing research groups with limited coordination. There was no equivalent to the radiation laboratory, no centralized effort pushing systematic improvement across all applications simultaneously. The result was that by mid-1943, American surface combatants routinely carried multiple radar systems optimized for different functions. SG surface search radar provided long-range detection. Fire control radars guided guns. Air search radars detected incoming aircraft at distances that allowed effective combat air patrol vectoring. These systems were integrated through plotting rooms where operators synthesized electronic data into comprehensive battlefield awareness. Japanese ships in the same period typically carried a single radar system, if any, used primarily for early warning. Integration with weapons systems was minimal. Fire control remained primarily optical. This meant Japanese ships in night combat were fighting partially blind against enemies who could see clearly. The Battle of Guadalcanal demonstrated this disparity with brutal clarity. Rear Admiral Lee commanded Task Force 64, built around battleships Washington and South Dakota, screened by 4 destroyers. His mission was to prevent Japanese reinforcement of Guadalcanal. Intelligence indicated a strong Japanese force approaching, built around battleship Kirishima and multiple cruisers under Admiral Kondo. Lee was uniquely qualified for radar-directed night action. Before the war, he had won 5 gold medals in shooting at the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp, demonstrating the precision and calculation that would define his command style. More importantly, he had been involved in radar development and testing since its earliest days. He understood the capabilities and limitations of the equipment in ways most commanders did not. He had studied the technology, participated in trials, and grasped both its potential and its constraints. This knowledge gave Lee something rare among naval commanders in 1942: confidence in systems that seemed almost magical to contemporaries. He trusted the technology enough to fight based on electronic information rather than visual confirmation. Lee had conducted exercises using radar for fire control. He had seen the system work in tests. He knew that radar could provide accurate firing solutions at ranges where optical systems were useless. This knowledge meant he was willing to exploit capabilities other commanders might have been too cautious to trust in combat. Lee's force made contact at 23:17 hours on November 14. SG radar detected Japanese ships at over 18,000 yards. Lee held fire, allowing Japanese forces to approach while his fire control radars locked on and computed firing solutions. This required discipline. His crews could hear Japanese forces approaching through sound gear. Lookouts strained to catch visual glimpses, but Lee trusted his radar to tell him when to fire. Japanese forces, relying on visual detection, were unaware they had been detected and tracked. The Japanese force split, attempting to flank Lee's formation. This maneuver, tactically sound against an optically detecting enemy, was futile against radar tracking. Lee's plotting rooms maintained perfect awareness of Japanese dispositions. At 0100 hours, with Japanese ships at 8,400 yards and still unaware of Washington's position, Lee ordered batteries released. Washington's main battery spoke first. 16-inch guns firing on radar solution in complete darkness. The salvo hit. Kirishima's superstructure erupted in flames, providing the first visual confirmation of her position to Japanese observers. But by then it was too late. Washington's fire control radars held lock. Salvo after salvo crashed into Kirishima with mechanical precision. The Japanese battleship attempted to return fire. Her optical rangefinders struggled to acquire Washington through darkness, smoke, and rain squalls. The few salvos Kirishima managed were unguided estimates based on muzzle flashes. None found their target. Within 7 minutes, Kirishima was mission killed, dead in the water with critical damage. She would sink 3 hours later. The engagement had lasted 7 minutes. In that time, Washington had fired 75 16-inch shells. At least 9, possibly as many as 20, scored direct hits. Kirishima had fired only a handful of poorly aimed salvos. The disparity was not in courage or training, but in fundamental capability. Lee had been fighting with perfect information. Kondo had been fighting blind. Admiral Kondo's after-action report noted that American forces had demonstrated detection and fire control capabilities that seemed impossible. Japanese observers reported American salvos arriving with uncanny accuracy, despite absence of searchlight illumination or visible use of optical rangefinders. Some Japanese officers speculated that American ships must have been equipped with new optical systems of extraordinary power. The idea that Americans were using radar for blind fire targeting seemed beyond credibility. This skepticism was not stupidity, but experience talking. Japanese doctrine held that radar lacked the precision for fire control. This was true of Japanese radar. It was not true of American systems, but Japanese engineers had no way of knowing American technology had advanced so far beyond their own assumptions. The truth began to penetrate Japanese thinking through accumulated evidence. Lieutenant Commander Toshikazu Omai, a staff officer in the 8th Fleet, was tasked with analyzing patterns in American tactical success. He collected after-action reports from multiple engagements. A pattern emerged. American forces consistently initiated fire at ranges exceeding visual detection capability. American accuracy in night combat exceeded what optical systems could explain. American ships maneuvered as though they possessed perfect awareness of Japanese positions, regardless of visibility conditions. Omei concluded that Americans possessed detection systems fundamentally superior to Japanese equipment. His analysis estimated American radar technology was approximately 2 years ahead of Japanese capabilities. This report, submitted in early 1943, was met with skepticism by staff officers who found the assessment too pessimistic. The idea that American technology, from a nation Japanese propaganda had dismissed as decadent and industrially weak, could be 2 years ahead was psychologically difficult to accept. But Omei was correct, and the gap was widening. By mid-1943, the technological disparity had expanded to 3 years. American destroyers commissioned in 1943 carried radar suites more capable than those on Japanese battleships. American fire control systems were being integrated with mechanical computers that automated firing solutions, removing human calculation delays. The Mark 37 gun director represented the integration of radar with mechanical computation. The director combined optical rangefinders with radar tracking, feeding data into Mark 1A computers that calculated firing solutions. The system could track targets visually when possible, switch seamlessly to radar tracking when targets were obscured, and maintain fire control solutions during transitions between modes. The Mark 1A fire control computer was a mechanical marvel, a room-sized assembly of gears, cams, and servo mechanisms that continuously solved differential equations describing projectile ballistics. Operators input target data, ship motion, wind speed, and powder temperature. The computer automatically calculated gun elevation and bearing, adjusting continuously as targets maneuvered. Earlier mechanical computers required human operators to input manual adjustments based on observed fall of shot. Mark 1A integrated radar feedback directly into calculation loops. When radar showed projectiles falling short, the computer automatically adjusted elevation for the next salvo. This closed-loop fire control was revolutionary. It removed human reaction time from the targeting cycle. The result was sustained accurate fire at ranges where visual systems could not function. American battleships could engage targets at 20,000 yards in darkness or poor visibility and maintain hit rates that would have been considered excellent in daylight action with optical systems. Japanese battleships attempting to return fire were reduced to firing at muzzle flashes, with no ability to observe fall of shot or correct aim. The technical sophistication extended beyond individual systems to integration across the ship. Combat information centers brought together radar data from multiple sources. Surface search radar provided overall battlefield picture. Fire control radar tracked specific targets. Air search radar detected aircraft. Operators synthesized this information into comprehensive awareness that was distributed to all stations through interior communication systems. This integration created command advantages as significant as the technical advantages of individual systems. American commanders fighting night actions had accurate real-time information about friendly and enemy positions. They could maneuver forces based on complete battlefield awareness. Japanese commanders, lacking equivalent integration, made decisions based on fragmentary reports from lookouts who could only see nearby portions of the engagement. Japanese naval gunnery remained dependent on human calculation. Range keepers assisted with computations, but final firing solutions required trained operators making manual adjustments. This worked well when visual contact allowed continuous observation. It was nearly useless when targets existed only as radar returns. The technological gap manifested in every aspect of naval operations. American carrier task forces operated with air search radar that detected incoming raids at over 100 miles. This allowed combat air patrol to be vectored for intercepts before Japanese aircraft reached launch range for their own strikes. Japanese carriers lacked equivalent capability. Their combat air patrol relied on visual detection, often learning of incoming raids only when American aircraft appeared overhead. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated American radar superiority at fleet scale. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded Japanese carrier forces, 9 carriers with over 400 aircraft. He planned to use superior aircraft range to strike American carriers while remaining outside American strike range. The plan required that Japanese scouts locate American forces first, and that Japanese strikes avoid American combat air patrol during approach. Neither assumption held. American radar detected Japanese scouts at extended ranges. When Ozawa launched his first strike wave of 69 aircraft on June 19 at 0830 hours, American radar detected the formation while it was still forming up over Japanese carriers. By 1000 hours, American fighter directors had vectored Hellcats to intercept. The Japanese strike ran into a coordinated defense with fighters positioned by radar guidance to achieve maximum intercept efficiency. The American defense was clinical in its efficiency. Fighter directors aboard carriers watched radar screens showing friendly and enemy formations. They vectored combat air patrol to intercept positions calculated to maximize defensive effectiveness. Hellcat pilots received continuous radio updates on enemy position, altitude, and heading. They approached Japanese formations from optimal attack angles, achieving surprise despite attacking in daylight. Japanese strike leaders found themselves intercepted before reaching attack positions. Formations were broken up by coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Pilots who survived the initial onslaught faced the gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire from ships alerted by radar with time to prepare. The proximity-fused shells filled the air with fragments that damaged aircraft even near misses. Of 69 aircraft in the first wave, only 27 survived to return to their carriers. Not one landed a hit on American ships. Ozawa launched 3 more strikes that day. The second wave launched at 0:56 hours with 129 aircraft. American radar detected the formation at 09:15 hours. Fighter directors scrambled additional combat air patrol and positioned forces for optimal intercept. 97 Japanese aircraft were shot down. 6 damaged American ships, none critically. The third wave launched at 1:0000 hours with 47 aircraft. 27 were shot down. The fourth wave launched at 1:30 hours with 82 aircraft. 73 were shot down. By day's end, Japan had lost 346 carrier aircraft in combat. American combat losses totaled 29 aircraft on June 19. The numbers told a story of systematic slaughter. Japanese formations were being destroyed with industrial efficiency. Each wave received the same treatment: radar detection at long range, fighter direction to optimal intercepts, coordinated attacks breaking up formations, anti-aircraft fire guided by radar tracking. The system worked regardless of how many aircraft Japan launched or what tactics they employed. From Ozawa's perspective aboard carrier Taiho, the battle was incomprehensible disaster. Strike after strike departed to attack American carriers. None achieved significant hits. Few aircraft returned. Radio communications from strike leaders indicated they were under attack by fighters who seemed to know exactly where Japanese formations would be. The only explanation was that American detection capabilities exceeded anything Japanese intelligence had believed possible. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese pilots was profound. Lieutenant Masatake Okumiya, a carrier division commander who would later write extensively about Japanese naval aviation, noted in post-war writings that after the Philippine Sea, Japanese pilots increasingly felt they were fighting an enemy who could see them coming from impossible distances. This was not superstition. It was accurate assessment of radar capability, creating tactical omniscience. American technological superiority extended beyond detection and fire control into weapons themselves. The proximity fuse, developed at the Applied Physics Laboratory and Section T of the National Defense Research Committee, entered combat use in January 1943. The fuse used a miniature radar transmitter to detonate shells when they passed near aircraft, dramatically increasing the lethality of anti-aircraft fire. The first combat use occurred on January 5, 1943, when cruiser Helena fired proximity-fused 5-inch shells against Japanese aircraft off Guadalcanal. The results were immediately apparent. Hit rates against maneuvering aircraft increased dramatically. Shells that would have been clean misses with contact fuses now detonated close enough to damage or destroy targets with fragments. The development of the proximity fuse represented American technical achievement at its finest. The device needed to withstand the shock of gun firing, forces exceeding 20,000 times gravity. It needed to operate reliably after being subjected to extreme acceleration, vibration, and temperature changes. It needed to discriminate between aircraft targets and surface clutter, like waves. It needed to function in rain, clouds, and varying humidity. It needed to be cheap enough for mass production, as shells were expendable munitions. Solving these problems required advances across multiple fields: miniaturization of vacuum tubes to create radio transmitters small enough to fit in shell casings, development of battery technology that could survive firing shock and provide power for the few seconds of shell flight, design of arming systems that prevented premature detonation but activated the fuse at safe distance from the firing ship, engineering of manufacturing processes that could produce millions of units with consistent reliability. The proximity fuse program involved over 4,000 people working across multiple laboratories and factories. Component production was distributed to minimize security risks. Final assembly occurred in dedicated facilities. Quality control testing verified every unit before acceptance. The system produced proximity fuses at rates exceeding 100,000 per month by 1944. Japanese air crews suddenly faced defensive fire that exploded near their aircraft, even when gunners aimed imperfectly. The psychological impact was significant. Pilots reported shells bursting near them with uncanny accuracy. The effect was amplified because Japanese intelligence did not understand how the fuses worked. Pilots could not develop countermeasures because they did not know what they were facing. Japanese engineers knew proximity fuses were theoretically possible. Multiple research groups studied the concept. But building them required industrial capacity, precision manufacturing, and systematic quality control at scales. Japanese industry could not match while simultaneously producing ships, aircraft, and conventional weapons. The proximity fuse was not simply one invention, but the product of an entire industrial ecosystem optimized for high-technology mass production. By late 1944, the technological disparity had become so severe that American and Japanese naval forces were essentially fighting different wars. American planning assumed comprehensive radar coverage, automated fire control, and integrated command and control through combat information centers. Operations were designed around these capabilities. American doctrine considered night operations against surface forces routine because radar made darkness tactically irrelevant. Japanese planning assumed that most engagements would be decided by visual detection and manual gunnery. Night operations were considered high risk, requiring specially trained forces because Japanese capabilities remained primarily optical. This meant Japanese commanders planning operations faced constraints American commanders had eliminated through technology. The Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944 illustrated the Gulf. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura led a force of 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 4 destroyers through Surigao Strait in darkness, attempting to attack American landing forces at Leyte Gulf. His force was detected by American patrol craft at 0236 hours. Radar tracked Nishimura's progress as he advanced up the strait into a trap. Rear Admiral Jesse Barrett Oldendorf commanded American blocking forces. 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, and multiple destroyer squadrons positioned to cross Nishimura's T, the classic naval tactic of bringing maximum firepower to bear against an advancing column. But this was T-crossing with radar guidance. American destroyers launched torpedo attacks guided by radar tracking. American battleships opened fire at approximately 20,000 yards, with main batteries directed by radar fire control. Nishimura's force was destroyed in detail. Both battleships sunk, the cruiser sunk. 3 destroyers sunk, the remaining destroyer fled damaged. American casualties were minimal. The battle had been less a fight than an execution, with Japanese forces advancing unknowingly into preset positions where American radar guided, weapons achieved near-perfect surprise and devastating accuracy. Nishimura had been sailing blind into an enemy who watched his every move. Japanese lookouts never detected American battleships until salvos began landing. The first indication Japanese forces had of American presence was shells exploding among their ships. They attempted to return fire, but had no clear targets. American battleships remained at ranges where visual detection was impossible in darkness. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes. It demonstrated that against radar-equipped opponents, advancing through confined waters at night was suicide. Lieutenant Commander Omei, analyzing the battle afterward, noted that Japanese forces had attempted tactics that would have been sound against an opponent with similar technological limitations. Against radar-equipped forces with fire control automation, those same tactics were fatal. The lesson was clear, but came too late to affect Japanese operational planning. The full statistical picture of American industrial output in naval construction became apparent only after war's end. Between December 1941 and September 1945, American shipyards produced 28 fleet carriers. Japan built 17 carriers of all types during the same period, and most of these were converted from other hull types rather than purpose-built. American production included 71 escort carriers, small carriers built on merchant hulls optimized for submarine warfare and amphibious support. These vessels, individually less capable than fleet carriers, provided distributed air power across the Pacific. Japanese production included no equivalent, as Japanese doctrine focused on fleet carriers for decisive battle rather than distributed air power for continuous operations. American shipyards produced 8 new battleships during the war, all of Iowa or North Carolina class. These vessels incorporated radar and fire control technology from their initial construction, with designs optimized for integration of electronic systems. The North Carolina class, authorized before war began, were retrofitted with improved radar during construction. The Iowa class incorporated lessons learned from early war combat, with electrical systems and interior layouts designed around radar integration from the keel up. Japanese battleship Yamato and her sister Musashi represented the apex of traditional battleship design. 64,000 tons displacement, 18-inch main batteries throwing shells weighing over 1 ton each, armor designed to resist any shell fired by any existing battleship. These vessels were engineering marvels, the largest battleships ever constructed. But they were built around assumptions that proved obsolete. Their design emphasized visual range finding with optical equipment of extraordinary quality. Their fire control systems relied on trained operators manually computing solutions. They carried radar as an afterthought, equipment retrofitted into spaces not designed to accommodate it. The integration was poor, the capability was limited. Against radar-equipped opponents, Yamato and Musashi's advantages in armor and armament were negated by inability to bring guns to bear effectively. The contrast illustrated diverging philosophies. Japanese design prioritized the perfect execution of traditional naval warfare. American design prioritized integration of new technologies that changed the nature of naval warfare. Japanese battleships were built to win traditional gun duels. American battleships were built to fight integrated actions where radar-guided guns engaged targets at ranges visual systems could not reach. The disparity extended through every category. 377 American destroyers compared to roughly 63 Japanese destroyers. American destroyers late in the war carried radar suites that provided detection, tracking, and fire control, capabilities approaching those of pre-war cruisers. Japanese destroyers remained primarily gun and torpedo platforms with limited electronic capability. 232 American submarines compared to 126 Japanese submarines. American submarines were equipped with radar that allowed surface attacks at night with minimal risk of detection. Japanese submarines relied primarily on periscope observation, limiting their effectiveness against alert opponents. American escort carriers, 71 vessels built on merchant hulls, provided distributed air power across the Pacific. These ships operated in support of amphibious landings, conducted anti-submarine patrols, and provided air cover for convoys. Japanese production included no equivalent vessels. Japanese doctrine remained focused on fleet carriers for decisive battle rather than distributed air power for sustained operations. The numerical disparity was severe, but numbers alone understated the real gap. An Essex-class carrier commissioned in 1944 represented more combat power than 2 or 3 Japanese carriers from earlier in the war. An American destroyer from 1944 could perform missions that would have required a cruiser in 1941. The compound effect of numerical and technological superiority meant American forces were overmatching Japanese forces by wider margins as the war progressed. An Essex-class carrier, the backbone of American carrier forces by late war, represented the integration of industrial power and technological advancement. Standard displacement 27,100 tons. Full load displacement 33,900 tons. Length 872 feet. Capacity for 83 to 108 aircraft depending on type mix. But the numbers didn't capture what made Essex-class carriers dominant. Each carried multiple radar systems providing comprehensive awareness. Air search radar detected aircraft at over 100 miles. Surface search radar tracked ships to the horizon. Height-finding radar determined altitude of detected aircraft. Fire control radar guided anti-aircraft batteries. This electronic sensor suite, integrated through combat information centers, staffed by specialists trained in radar interpretation, gave Essex-class carriers battlefield awareness impossible for earlier carriers. 24 Essex-class carriers were built. 32 had been ordered, but 8 were cancelled after Japanese surrender. Of the 24 completed, 17 saw combat in World War II. These ships provided the striking power that destroyed Japanese naval aviation, supported amphibious operations across the Pacific, and ultimately struck Japan itself. The carriers operated with an aggressiveness that would have been reckless without technological advantage. American carrier task forces regularly operated within range of Japanese land-based aircraft because radar gave sufficient warning to coordinate defense. Combat air patrol could be maintained over task forces and guided to intercepts by fighter directors watching radar screens. This allowed American carriers to operate in waters. Japanese carriers avoided as too dangerous. Japanese carriers late in the war were reduced to operating from positions where land-based air cover could provide protection their own radar couldn't. The roles had reversed. Japanese forces sought cover. American forces ranged freely, confident their technology gave them decisive advantage regardless of enemy numerical strength in any given area. The technological transformation was so complete that by war's end, American naval forces operated with assumptions Japanese forces could not match. Night operations were routine for American ships equipped with radar. Japanese forces still treated night operations as requiring special conditions and specially trained crews. American carriers operated offensively close to enemy bases. Japanese carriers operated defensively under land-based air cover. American battleships hunted enemy warships. Japanese battleships were relegated to secondary roles, their main batteries largely irrelevant against enemies who could strike from ranges exceeding visual detection. The lessons Japanese officers drew from the war would shape their understanding of modern warfare. Lieutenant Masatake Okumiya, who survived the war and became lieutenant general in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, wrote extensively about Japanese experiences. His post-war writings, including co-authoring Midway the Battle That Doomed Japan with Mitsuo Fuchida, analyzed how technological inferiority had systematically undermined Japanese tactical advantages. Okumiya had graduated from the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy in 1930. He served as a carrier division commander during the war, flying combat missions and planning operations. His perspective combined tactical experience with strategic understanding. After the war, he became one of the most important interpreters of Japanese naval history for American audiences. His central thesis was that Japanese forces had entered the war with tactics and training optimized for the technological baseline of 1941. American forces had systematically raised that baseline through continuous technological deployment. By 1943, Japanese tactical advantages in visual detection and manual gunnery were irrelevant because engagements were being decided by radar and automated fire control. Japanese forces were fighting with outdated methods against enemies who had changed the fundamental nature of combat. Okumiya emphasized that this was not a failure of Japanese courage or tactical skill. Japanese pilots and sailors fought with determination throughout the war. Unit cohesion and fighting spirit remained high even as material conditions deteriorated. But spirit could not overcome systematic technological disadvantage. The bravest pilot could not defeat radar-guided fighters that intercepted his formation before it reached attack range. Lieutenant Commander Omei, whose wartime intelligence analysis had correctly identified American technological superiority early in the war, was extensively interviewed by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey after Japanese surrender. Survey interrogators described him as the most reliable and accurate source of information developed in Japan. He provided detailed analysis of Japanese operations, strategic decisions, and assessments of American capabilities. Omei graduated from the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy in 1922. He served as staff officer in various fleet commands, positions that gave him access to operational intelligence and strategic planning. His analytical skills made him invaluable to American interrogators seeking to understand Japanese decision-making. His post-war writings for United States Naval Institute proceedings provided detailed Japanese perspective on the technological gap. His article Japanese Commentary on Guadalcanal, published in 1951, offered insights that corrected American understanding of several engagements. He later served as consultant to Admiral Samuel Eliot Morrison for his multi-volume history of United States naval operations in World War II. Omei's assessment was that Japanese naval forces had been defeated not through lack of courage or poor tactics, but through systematic technological inferiority that made individual battles increasingly unwinnable as the war progressed. He estimated that American radar and fire control technology had been approximately 2 years ahead of Japanese equivalents in late 1941. By mid-1943, this had widened to 3 years. By war's end, it had expanded to at least 5 years. The gap widened because American industrial and research capacity allowed rapid iteration and improvement while Japanese capacity was overwhelmed simply trying to deploy earlier generation systems. American radar development progressed through multiple generations during the war. Japanese radar development struggled to get first-generation systems into widespread deployment. The compound interest of technological advancement meant initial advantages grew exponentially. Omei noted that Japan's fundamental error was not failing to develop advanced technology, but failing to understand that modern industrial war required technological baseline to be continuously advanced across an entire military structure. Individual brilliant systems were meaningless if they could not be mass-produced, widely deployed, and continuously upgraded. American victory stemmed from systematic technological deployment at scale, not from individual technical breakthroughs. This understanding came too late to affect the war's outcome. For American naval forces, the war validated an approach to warfare that would define American military doctrine for decades. Technology could create advantages so decisive that traditional factors like individual courage, unit training, and tactical skill became secondary considerations. Investing in technological superiority delivered returns that exceeded any other military investment. The officers who fought the Pacific War returned home, convinced that America must never allow technological gaps to develop in America's disfavor. The radar and fire control systems that defeated Japan led directly to guided missiles, computerized battle management, and network-centric warfare. The philosophy remained constant across generations. Remove humans from decision loops where machines perform better. Automate everything that can be automated. integrate systems for synergistic effects that exceed the sum of individual capabilities. The Japanese Navy of 1941 had been a formidable force built on decades of experience and training. Officers were professionals who had spent careers mastering their craft. Enlisted men were trained to standards that exceeded those of most naval forces. Equipment was modern and well-maintained. Tactics were sophisticated and well-rehearsed. By conventional measures, the Imperial Japanese Navy was one of the finest naval forces in history. But conventional measures proved inadequate when the nature of combat changed. Experience and training built for one technological era proved insufficient when the technological era shifted. The Americans had not simply defeated the Japanese Navy. They had made the kind of navy Japan had built obsolete. The fast battleship, the mass torpedo attack, the night engagement with superior optics, all the elements Japanese doctrine emphasized became secondary to the overwhelming advantage of seeing the enemy when the enemy could not see you. The battleship Kirishima had been modern and powerful by 1941 standards. Her optical rangefinders represented the finest technology money could buy. Her crew had trained for years in visual gunnery and night combat techniques. None of this mattered when she faced an enemy who tracked her through electronics she could not detect, computed firing solutions through machines she could not match, and struck with accuracy her optical systems could not achieve. In 7 minutes of radar-directed gunfire, USS Washington demonstrated the decisive nature of technological superiority. The engagement was not close. It was not a battle between equals where courage or skill tipped the balance. It was systematic destruction of an opponent who lacked the technology to fight back effectively. Kirishima's crew fought bravely. Her officers made tactically sound decisions based on the information available to them, but they were fighting blind against an enemy who could see perfectly. This was the essential lesson of American technological superiority in the Pacific War. Victory belonged not to the Navy with the most courage or best training, but to the Navy that successfully deployed advanced technology across the force. Individual heroism, tactical brilliance, and professional excellence remained important, but they could not overcome systematic technological inferiority. The Americans had leaped ahead, and the gap widened throughout the war. Japanese forces fought with increasing desperation as it became clear they were overmatched not just numerically but fundamentally. By 1945, Japanese naval forces were reduced to kamikaze attacks because conventional tactics had proven futile against enemies whose technology made them nearly invulnerable to traditional naval combat methods. The Japanese Navy fought until the last day of the war. Officers and men demonstrated courage that earned respect even from enemies. But courage could not bridge the technological chasm. The future had arrived November 15, 1942, in the darkness off Savo Island, when Washington's radar locked onto Kirishima and demonstrated that naval warfare had entered a new era. That future belonged to the nation that had built it, deployed it, and continuously improved it through systematic industrial effort that transformed laboratory advances into fleet-wide capabilities. The Americans had not just won the naval war, they had redefined what naval warfare meant.